Most people have a plan. Go to school, get a job, build a career, maybe buy a house somewhere reasonable. Stay safe, stay comfortable, stay predictable. Riley and Courtney Casey had a plan too. It just didn't survive contact with a dirt road in Northern Idaho. What started as a YouTube video meant for a handful of friends has turned into something that nobody, not even Riley and Courtney themselves, could have predicted when they first picked up a camera. Over 1 million people now watch this husband and wife team tackle projects that most experienced contractors would walk away from. They've built roads with zero experience. They've run heavy equipment for the first time on camera. They've broken bulldozers, fixed them, and kept filming. And every time it looked like they had finally settled into something sustainable, they made a decision that blew the whole thing wide open again. The latest one is the biggest yet, a decommissioned Navy missile patrol boat. A conversion project so involved and so physically demanding that most professional marine fabricators would charge a fortune just to estimate it. And when it's done, if it's done, they're pointing it at Alaska. That's not a metaphor, that's the actual plan. To understand why they made this call and what it says about where this channel is headed, you have to go back to where all of this really started. Not the boat, not the land, not even the camper. You have to go back to two people who genuinely had no idea what they were doing, picked up a camera anyway, and accidentally built something remarkable. Nobody sets out to become a YouTube channel. At least Riley and Courtney didn't. Their background before any of this had nothing to do with content creation. Riley was mechanically minded, the kind of person who figures things out by taking them apart, and together they had been involved in off-road fabrication and house flipping. Practical skills, physical work, the kind of stuff you do with your hands, not a camera. In 2020, they had a specific goal in mind. They wanted to spend a winter hitting ski resorts across the country, and to do that they needed a rig. Rather than buy a truck camper off a lot, they sold the one they had and used the money to build their own, from scratch, on a 2015 Ram 3500. Custom design, custom features, built specifically around how they actually lived and traveled, including enough space for their dogs. The whole build took 2.5 months and cost around $20,000 in materials. And because they wanted friends and family to follow along, they filmed it. That was the accident. They had no real expectation that anyone outside their circle would care. They weren't trying to go viral. They weren't chasing subscribers. They were just documenting a build because it seemed like a reasonable thing to do, and because the process was interesting enough to share. The truck camper video got over 1 million views. Then people started coming back. What happened next is the part that matters because it tells you everything about who these two actually are. Most people in that situation would have immediately pivoted, started making content around whatever the algorithm rewarded, chased trends, packaged themselves for growth. Riley and Courtney did the opposite. They kept doing exactly what they were already doing, just bigger. The channel wasn't the product. Their life was the product. And they were about to make a decision that would change that life completely. The original idea behind the truck camper was straightforward enough. Build the rig, travel for a year, then come back and return to running their off-road shop. That was the timeline. That was the exit strategy. It didn't survive the first leg of the trip. Somewhere on that road, they passed through Northern Idaho. And somewhere in Northern Idaho, something happened that's hard to explain to anyone who hasn't experienced it. That feeling of arriving somewhere and realizing, with unreasonable certainty, that you're looking at a place you're supposed to stay. Green mountains, remote land, space, quiet. They bought 20 acres, raw, untouched land, with nothing on it, no infrastructure, no buildings, no road in, just trees and dirt and the kind of silence you don't get anywhere near a city. They spent their savings on it. The plan to go back and run the shop quietly dissolved. The YouTube channel, which had started as a side project, was suddenly the thing that had to work, because they'd bet everything on the land and the land needed funding. What followed was not a comfortable homesteading journey. They weren't moving into a cabin and posting aesthetic photos. They were doing hard, physical, unglamorous work from day one. Riley built a road with no prior road building experience. They bought and operated heavy equipment they'd never used before. They documented every mistake, every breakdown, every moment where the project looked like it might fall apart entirely. That honesty, the willingness to show failure in real time, was what kept the audience coming back. And the audience did come back, consistently, in growing numbers. Because there's something almost uncomfortably relatable about watching two people tackle something genuinely difficult, with genuine uncertainty about whether it'll work, and keep going anyway. That's not a character they were playing. That was just their actual situation. And it turns out a lot of people find that worth watching. But the land was only the beginning of what they were willing to attempt. Most people who buy raw land and go off-grid hire contractors for the hard parts. The electrical work, the well, the structural builds, you bring in professionals for those pieces, do the finishing work yourself, and call it a DIY project. That's not how the Caseys operate. Over the years following that land purchase, they built out their Northern Idaho property almost entirely by hand. Every major structure, every system, every installation done themselves, documented as they went. A container shop, a tiny house, a full solar electrical system, a well, a barn dominium, a post-frame building with an apartment inside, and none of it was done by people who already knew how to do it. They learned each trade as the project demanded it, failed publicly, course-corrected publicly, and finished. The channel grew with every project, not just because the builds were impressive, but because of how they were presented. There's no polish for the sake of polish here. When Riley broke the bulldozer, that went on camera. When something didn't work the way they'd planned, they didn't cut around it. The audience was getting a real-time record of what it actually looks like to build a life with your hands. The messy, expensive, physically exhausting version that nobody glamorizes. That authenticity created something unusual for YouTube, a community that was genuinely invested, not just in the projects, but in the people. Viewers who'd been watching since the truck camper build now had years of context. They knew how Riley thought through a problem. They knew when Courtney was holding it together by a thread and smiling through it anyway. They knew the land. They knew the dogs. They felt in a real sense like they were part of what was being built, which made the next project hit differently. Because this one wasn't a building on a piece of land in Idaho. This one floated, and it nearly sank before they even started the real work. Before the patrol boat, there was a barge. At some point during the Idaho years, Riley and Courtney became interested in a decommissioned Navy barge that was moored at a marina near friends of theirs. The story behind it, as Courtney has told it, is almost comically on brand for them. They were visiting those friends, saw this old military vessel sitting there, and felt immediately compelled to own it. Riley apparently spent some time as a kid going on houseboat trips, and those memories stuck. The barge reminded him of something. He tracked down the owner sold it. What they did next was convert a steel military vessel into a livable space, not a glamping setup, not a quirky weekend retreat, a home, with windows and doors and interior finishes, built out by hand in the same way they'd approached every other structure on the Idaho property. Nothing was level because nothing on a barge is ever entirely level, and the whole thing moved constantly beneath them while they worked. That's a set of challenges most home builders never encounter. The project got picked up by mainstream media in 2025. Broader coverage, a new audience, more eyes on the channel. It proved something important, that their audience wasn't just interested in off-grid homesteading, they were interested in whatever Riley and Courtney decided to tackle next, because the process was always the point. But the barge also proved something to Riley and Courtney themselves. Working with a steel vessel, navigating the particular difficulties of a structure that floats, they could handle it. They had the skills, or they could acquire them. Marine fabrication wasn't some unreachable discipline. It was just another version of the problem-solving they'd been doing for years on land. And once you believe that, a decommissioned Navy missile patrol boat starts to look less like an insane idea and more like the obvious next move. Here's what they actually bought. A decommissioned Navy missile patrol boat, a real military vessel, built for speed and combat readiness, now stripped of its weapons systems and sitting in surplus. These boats are not designed for comfort. They're not designed for family living or extended expeditions through cold water coastal passages. They're designed to move fast and hit hard, and that's about it. Converting one into a livable family expedition vessel is a project of a completely different scale than anything they'd attempted before. You're not just building rooms inside a shell, you're reworking mechanical and electrical systems that were designed for military use. You're addressing safety requirements specific to ocean-going vessels. You're dealing with a hull and a drivetrain engineered for a purpose that no longer applies, and you're repurposing all of it for something the original designers never intended. The fabrication involved is heavy by any standard. Structural work, custom systems, marine-grade everything, because the consequences of a failure at sea are categorically different from a failure on a building site. On the Idaho property, if something went wrong with the electrical system, you fixed it. Out on the water, in cold weather, in a remote stretch of coast on the way to Alaska, the math changes entirely, and the destination is real. This isn't a vanity project that ends in a marina photo. The stated plan is to take this boat north, through the Pacific Northwest coastline, through British Columbia, through the inside passage if the route allows for it, and eventually into Alaska. That's not a short trip. It's not a safe trip by the standards of most families. It involves open water, unpredictable weather, mechanical systems being tested far from any service facility, and a crew that includes, in all likelihood, their kids. The channel has been documenting the conversion in real time. Every problem that comes up, and there are a lot of problems, goes on camera. Every solution, every moment where the scope of what they've committed to becomes fully visible. And the audience, all 1 million plus of them, are watching it unfold with the same mix of excitement and genuine concern that tends to follow these two into every major project. Because here's the thing about Ambition Strikes that separates them from most channels operating at this level. They don't manufacture tension. They don't need to. They consistently put themselves in situations where the stakes are real. The outcome is uncertain, and the only way through is to keep working. It would be easy to frame this boat project as content strategy. Big dramatic purchase, high-stakes conversion, spectacular destination. It almost writes itself from a YouTube perspective. And it's not wrong to notice that this kind of project scales well. The audience is enormous. The potential for sponsored content tied to marine equipment, navigation gear, safety systems, and expedition supplies is obvious. The channel's own merchandise line, including a coffee brand they launched specifically around the nautical theme, shows that they understand the commercial side of what they're doing. But reducing this to a content play misses something important. These are people who in 2020 spent their savings on raw land with no guarantee that a YouTube channel could fund what they were attempting. They didn't have a backup plan when they made that move. They had a truck camper, a camera, and the willingness to work harder than most people are prepared to. The risk was real, the pressure was real, and they made it work not because of algorithm tricks or manufactured drama, but because they were genuinely doing something worth watching. The boat carries the same energy. This is not a safe decision. Converting a military vessel for ocean travel is expensive, technically demanding, and potentially dangerous if anything goes wrong at sea. The Alaska Passage is not a beginner's route. The weather in those waters is unpredictable, and the margin for mechanical failure is essentially zero once you're deep in remote coastline. And yet, they bought the boat. They started the work. They're filming it. That pattern, identifying something that seems unreasonable, deciding to do it anyway, and then figuring it out in real time is the entire identity of this channel. It's what the name means. It's what the audience signed up for. And with over 1 million people now watching, the stakes of every decision extend beyond just their own family. There's a community built around this project. There are people who have followed Riley and Courtney since the truck camper days who are now watching them prepare to take a military boat into Alaskan waters. That's a different kind of pressure than any building project creates, and they're taking it on anyway. Step back from the boat for a second and look at the arc. A couple with a background in fabrication and house flipping builds a truck camper to go skiing. They film it for friends. 1 million people watch it. They impulse buy 20 acres of raw land in Idaho, spend their savings on it, and bet on themselves. They build roads, structures, and systems they've never built before. They document every failure. They grow to hundreds of thousands of subscribers. They buy a Navy barge and turn it into a home. Mainstream media covers it. They pass 1 million subscribers. They buy a decommissioned missile patrol boat and start converting it for an Alaskan expedition. That's not a content strategy, that's a life philosophy that happens to be filmed. The consistent thread across every chapter of this story is the same. Take on something that exceeds your current skill level, figure it out anyway, and don't hide the parts where it gets hard. That approach has built one of the more genuinely loyal audiences on the platform, because the viewers aren't just watching projects, they're watching people they trust demonstrate that hard things are possible if you're willing to do the work. The channel that exists now looks almost nothing like the one that launched on the back of a truck camper build. The subscriber count has grown past 1 million. The projects have escalated from DIY structures on private land to full military vessel conversions. The commercial side of the operation, merchandise, sponsorships, a branded coffee line, has developed into a real business built around the channel. And all of it is still being run by the same two people who had no intention of becoming content creators when they first picked up a camera in 2020. There's something worth sitting with in that. The original plan, travel for a year, run the off-road shop, stay the course, was completely blown up by a road trip and a piece of land. Everything that followed came from the willingness to say yes to the thing in front of them instead of sticking to the plan they'd started with. The truck camper led to the land. The land led to the builds. The builds led to the barge. The barge led to the boat. The boat is leading to Alaska. And nobody, including them, knows what comes after Alaska. Here's what the Ambition Strike story actually is when you strip away the subscriber counts and the impressive build list and the military vessel currently sitting in a yard somewhere being converted by a husband and wife with their own hands. It's a story about what happens when people refuse to treat their life as a fixed thing, when they keep asking what comes next instead of settling into what already works. When the answer to that seems too hard is let's figure it out on camera. Riley and Courtney Casey didn't plan any of this. The channel was an accident. The land was an impulse. The barge was a memory from Riley's childhood that turned into a build project. The boat is the logical endpoint of years of saying yes to things that seemed unreasonable until they weren't. 1 million people are watching the Alaska plan take shape in real time, and that number will likely keep moving because the audience understands by now that when these two commit to something, they see it through. No matter how complicated the mechanical systems get, no matter how cold the water is, no matter how many things break along the way, that's the decision that changes everything, not the boat purchase itself, but the mindset behind it. The consistent, almost stubborn refusal to stop at the last big thing and call it enough. Every chapter of this story has ended with a bigger question than the one it started with, and this boat is just the latest version of that question pointed north, moving towards something most people would never attempt. The question is, what does Alaska look like through their camera? And what do they buy after that?